Hello, I'm Ken Roulston. I'm the managing concierge for the M&A platform initiative that has been established by Kaseya. My role is to help Kaseya's partners with their M&A strategies when it comes to growth through acquisition, or indeed to help partners who are considering selling their business to help them to get that aspect right and maximize their exit value.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Ken. Really, really special time to have you here. You're one of the first interviews that we're doing. We've been working behind the scenes together a lot, so I've been getting to know you as we've been developing this platform. So honored to be here with you today. Excited to explore your background and your history. I wanted to kind of start with that and really, where did you come from? You are one of the leaders in the M&A Concierge platform today, but at some point you started as an MSP. So I'd like to kind of go backwards and explore from the very beginning. Where did you start?
It depends how far back you want to go, Mike. I'm actually 63 years of age and I've been in IT for 45 of those years. I started off as a computer engineer many, many years ago, 1979. I progressed into sales in the 1980s. And in the 1990s, I moved into a managing director position for the first time of what was then a break fix business based in Ireland. I stayed with that business, and through some support that I had from our US owner, we grew that business significantly from about 50 staff to 230 staff by 1999, when that business was sold off to a larger player within the space. I then took 10 years out of the direct aspect of the industry, working on other areas that were starting to develop, primarily around the internet, e-commerce, providing consulting roles, running a couple of businesses. But in 2009, just as I was approaching my 50th birthday, I felt that the time was right, that I'd gained enough experience to start a business that I could grow and ultimately sell and provide me with a pension, because I'd been very poor in building up a pension over the years. I'd spent whatever I'd earned. So I felt that the best way to realize some income for the future years was to run my own business. And at that stage, a number of things were happening. The MSP industry, which was really the sort of mature version of what was the break fix business in the 80s and 90s, was really starting to develop. And I saw an opportunity to get into that space and provide IT services. But there was also, if people recall, a fairly big financial recession going on at that time. And as part of that, I identified two companies here in Northern Ireland that were non-core subsidiaries and were being divested as a result of the businesses wanting to focus more on their core strategy. So I was able to fortunately acquire two businesses at a reasonably good price, and that gave me the foundation. I put those two businesses together and created a platform for growth, which is what I then proceeded to do over the next 14 years.
All right, Ken, amazing. So let's talk about some lessons that you learned, challenges, obstacles, things that you had to deal with as an MSP in the early stages. I love that you kind of came into this with eyes wide open. As a business owner, you said, I'm going to eventually one day sell my MSP. And I'd like to explore, what was it like in the very, very beginning? And I know it's hard to do that sometimes now, but looking back, what was a big challenge or a big obstacle or something you didn't expect?
Yes, it was very interesting times, and the first few months was, I suppose, a bit like a honeymoon. We were starting off on this new venture, and it was all very exciting. Having been working for a number of years and having lived through a number of previous recessions, I had this view that the recession that we were in 2009 would last a couple of years and then we'd be out of it and the marketplace would have picked back up again. And therefore, when I was funding the business at the start, I was funding it largely based on debt, using invoice discounting facilities and borrowed money. I had very little money of my own to run it with. And the challenge really for me in the first year or two was managing cash because the recession lasted longer and was deeper than I'd ever seen before. The marketplace didn't really pick up probably until 2013, which was 4 years down the track. So in those first 2, 3 years, cash was the big challenge. It was just managing cash flow all the time, and we were constantly having to find ways to, meet our requirements in terms of paying salaries and paying suppliers. Customers were difficult to get money out of because they were all experiencing their own issues. So I would hope and think that that type of situation may not repeat. I remember thinking many a time during those first couple of years that either I was very brave or very mad to start a business in the middle of a recession. At that stage, probably I was veering more towards being mad. But as time went on and we were able to ride that storm, we then started to progress and come out of it. And at that point, I thought, well, it was the right thing to do ultimately.
How did you come out of it? Like, let's kind of go back into that moment. That's something that keeps people up at night, right? Like not being able to make payroll if or struggling to having cash flow, any cash flow issues at all, right? That's catastrophic, and that puts some people right out of business. What was it? Can you get specific and give me some examples of what was happening and how you navigated out of it?
In terms of what was happening, managing the cash was such a challenge that I found myself, I'm not proud to say, but I found myself having to use personal credit cards to pay payroll, which ran up a lot of personal debt. I obviously was leveraging all of my personal assets to the full. I was, looking for any sources of legal money from private investment specifically. And I eventually reached the point when I knew that I was within months of probably going out of business, that if I was going to survive, I needed a real proper cash injection. And in order to get that, what I did was to reach out to people that I'd worked with previously in the industry, going back some years, who were experienced IT people who had built their own businesses and had either sold them or were in the process of exiting. And I approached them initially for advice and guidance. And they believed thankfully, in me and what we were doing. And they offered to take an equity stake in the business and in return to inject cash into the company. And that was the thing that really made the difference because two things. One, it stabilized our cash position and it allowed me to focus on growing the business as opposed to just running the business. But it also brought a strategic development to our direction of travel in that I, at that stage, was only operating in the Northern Ireland marketplace. They were all based in England. And they said, why not leverage Northern Ireland as a low cost, near shore location for MSP services, but sell them into the south of England, in particular around the London area, where the salaries were much higher. And that was something that I felt was entirely feasible to do because of the model that managed services has. But we all agreed that we needed a base in England in order to make it work properly. So the funding that they provided acted as a springboard to make our first acquisition in England, which was in 2014.
I want to go back on that question a little bit with you, Ken, because I'm sure right now there's somebody sitting out there going, "Oh my God, I'm having cash flow problems of myself. Should I go to my friends? Should I do, what? Maybe I should follow what Ken did." If you, Ken, today, here in 2024, what would you tell Ken from back in, when you were going through that back 2009, 2010 time?
I think I would say that, swallow your pride. Um, Owning 100% of nothing is worth nothing. If you end up owning 80% or 70% of something which has value, it's a much more important thing to do. I believe pride sometimes gets in the way of good decision making, and a number of MSPs that I've come across and owners are reluctant to give up equity. But equity dilution can actually be the way to address the situation, without you having to commit yourself to deeper personal debt. And it's a way also to bring in other expertise and knowledge because, as any MSP owner knows, running a business, particularly an MSP business, can be lonely. And having other investors in the business who have got market experience can add a lot of value during those difficult times.
So the way you did it back then, if I'm hearing you correctly, is you went and you were seeking out counseling, which right there is, like you said, swallow your pride, go out and get advice. Um, you ended up with investment money almost accidentally, but if somebody's doing this intentionally, is it different now? Should they be more prepared in different ways to go and present their case to these people that they're going to look for money from?
Yeah, I was in the fortunate position then where these people were business people, but they were friends, and therefore their due diligence requirements in terms of investing in the business were pretty limited. They were really taking a leap of faith in me personally. I found subsequently that when I needed to raise funds for other acquisitions or other areas of growth, going to more professional sources of funding, whether that be banking or other forms of growth capital or indeed private equity in the end, the level of due diligence is considerably higher. And therefore, the need to have your business in the correct shape is extremely important. Obviously, as we maybe will get to touch on, having your business structured properly for a sale is absolutely important. But when you think about it, an investment is in many respects the same process. Somebody is giving you money in some shape or form for some part or otherwise of your business. And in order to do that, you won't have to sell it to them, but then you have to convince them that the business is actually worth that investment. So it's a lot more difficult when you are going to those other professional sources of income than personal friends. But the same basic rules apply. You have to have a strong business to begin with. It has to be clean from an accounting perspective, and it's got to have a good opportunity to actually grow and provide a return on that investment.
So your very first transaction really was going out and getting people to invest in your business. What was next for you? What happened along that journey from starting that MSP to selling to exiting your MSP? What was the next big milestone? Were you investing in other things? What was your story there?
Well, I personally wasn't invested in anything else. I was solely focused on growing CMI as a business. Um, but yes, that journey started off with a goal of doing 5 million turnover in 5 years and generating double digit profitability. Um, when I got to that point, some 5, 6 years down the road, my investors said it's too early to sell. You're just getting going. The first couple of years, you were basically flat. You're only getting going now, so really, we think you should go for more growth, and you should aim to get to a business that's doing 10 million turnover. So perhaps the next big step came when we acquired a business which was actually bigger than us, which is not something I'd recommend, certainly not for your first one, but by that stage, it was our fifth acquisition. And we acquired a business which was, I say, slightly bigger than us in revenue terms. And it got us to that 10 million turnover pretty much overnight. And that was a major step change in the business to essentially double revenue, double headcount, double customers in one foul swoop. So that changed a lot of the dynamics of how the business was run. It had to become a lot more structured, and it had to become a lot more professional in how it went about what it was doing to ensure that we were meeting the needs of customers, shareholders, and indeed employees. Before we completed the journey, the goalposts kind of got moved on me again, and in the sense that the feeling was we should actually be aiming for more like an EBITDA number of about 2 million. And we were just over 1 million at that point in time. So that facilitated a review of the marketplace to look for opportunities to acquire a business that would give us again a step change in our valuation. And all of this was happening during COVID, which brought with it its own challenges. And the deal that we ultimately did was pretty much done 95% remotely. But that deal was successfully concluded in 2021. And that gave us then the size and scale to allow us to consider an exit at a decent price.
So I heard you say you wouldn't, when you were talking about acquiring a company that was a little bit bigger than you in revenue, you said you wouldn't necessarily recommend that. Why?
Acquiring a business has got a number of steps that you need to understand to go through on it. The actual process of acquiring a business is relatively easy. The process of integrating it afterwards is where the real challenge is. And if you acquire a business as your first acquisition, which is of a level of scale that it's an unknown experience for you, you won't know, you won't have done it before, and you may get some aspects of it right, but the thing that you'll probably struggle with is the cultural integration, and that's the effort. So I would always recommend, if you're acquiring a business, at least for the first time, it should be less than half of the business that you have today. It should be no bigger than 50% of your existing business, so that it's sizable in that it provides a step change, but it's manageable in terms of if it goes wrong, which it can do, you can deal with it. And with the exception of that one deal that I spoke about, which came 5 acquisitions down the journey, every other acquisition we did was essentially following the model of that. It was about half of our size at that point in time. So it gave us the step change benefit, but it also was manageable. And that's the key bit is making sure that you actually get the value back afterwards that you've paid for it up front.
So let's fast forward to the exit, Ken. What happened in the end? How did you get to where you are? What at the exit point, what challenges came up? Did things go right? I have so many questions on this, but I want to know what happened.
Well, we had reached a point in our valuation perception that we felt that the business was at a level that it would command a decent price in terms of the EBITDA multiple, because within the MSP industry, everything is about the size of the EBITDA, and the bigger it is, the bigger multiple you have. So getting to that level allowed us to command a price that would provide the financial return that the investors and the shareholders in the business were looking for. But also, the marketplace was maturing and consolidating, and had been frequent expressions of interest in us from larger players, which we had turned away up until that point in time. But I think personally, it came down to my view that I had reached a stage in my career where I wasn't sure that I was the right person to lead it to the next stage of development. And I could see that the way the market was maturing, that for that business, CMI, to really move to the next level, it needed to become part of a national MSP, um, a company that was considerably larger than us, that had breadth of skills, deeper resources, financially and otherwise. And therefore, I wanted to find the right partner from a strategic, financial, technical, and cultural fit perspective. And we we weren't sure who that was going to be. So we brought in some advisors to help us with the process. And, that process took 6 months to work through. And we had a number of options, including a strategic trade sale, which is what we ultimately did, or another round of private equity investment, which was tempting, but I felt that the timing just was right for me to step down. And it was also something that the other directors agreed at that stage as well. They were all shareholders, I should say, also by that stage, because I had, by various means, had provided the directors and senior management of the business with equity. So they all had a vested interest in the sale of the business when the right time came about.
So after you signed the paperwork, what happened? Were you out? Did you just stick around for a little while? Did you get back end payout, or did one lump? Like, what did that deal look like for you?
Yeah, well, there's two aspects of any sale transaction. There's the value and there's the structure. And the structure can vary from you literally walk out the door at the point in time that the business is sold through to a much more involved sort of earn-out arrangement. Mine was a wee bit of a hybrid of the two. Um, I rolled some of my equity back into the acquiring business. Not on an earn-out, it's direct investment in the acquiring business, which will hopefully provide a return a few years down the road when they probably will either go for a trade sale or another round of private equity. Um, but I officially stood down as managing director pretty much on the day of completion. Um, I that day was followed by a few hectic days of obviously communicating with the staff about what had happened, introducing the new owners into the business, communicating with our customers, specifically the larger customers, and in particular any customers that I had a direct personal relationship with. We obviously were also speaking to our suppliers to make them aware of what changes were likely to come about as a result of the acquisition. So that was the first few days, and then my email went very quiet. I found that I didn't have the normal 20 or 30 emails to greet me when I wakened up in the morning that I would normally have had, which was a bit disconcerting for a while. But I did have a consultancy agreement to assist the new owners for the 6 months following the sale with any transition and integration issues that I could help with in terms of either be staff or customers or indeed suppliers. That meant that I was kind of a consultant back into the business during that period, which was an interesting experience to be suddenly on the outside of a business that you'd actually built and grown for 15 years, 14 years. But yes, I did that for 6 months, and then that allowed me to step away from the business and do other things, which obviously includes this concierge initiative for Kaseya. And that's what I've been doing since pretty much last October when the 6 month expired.
Let's end on this here is, from teaching and advising so many MSPs over the years now in their own acquisitions, in their own sales, what are the biggest questions you get asked from them looking to sell now or in the future?
The biggest question I suppose that I always get asked is, how how does somebody value their business? On what basis is it valued? And for that, there's a reasonably straightforward mechanism. It's take your real EBITDA number, multiply it by whatever multiple is applicable to the size of that EBITDA. You add your whatever cash you have in the bank to it, or you take away whatever debt you have that you owe, and that will tell you what the underlying value is of the business. So it's a reasonably straightforward thing to do. Of course, the big challenge is getting the EBITDA to be as big as possible by growing your revenues, minimizing your costs during that period. In terms of what they don't ask, which is sometimes where I think some companies fall down, is how do they go about, once they've made the decision that they're going to sell, how do they go about preparing the business for that? Because there's a lot involved in the sale of a business, more so than there is in acquiring one. And there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of governance, contracts, administration, to get the business clean, having your accounts nice and clean and clear of any personal or other intercompany type transactions, having your all your ducks in your row in terms of your customer service recording, your employee satisfaction monitoring. All of these things, when it comes to a sale, are included within a very extensive list that any purchaser will want to delve into very deeply. And therefore, if you're going to consider a sale, I believe you need to actively almost do a due diligence check on yourself, probably a good 12 to 18 months before you're expecting to sell, to allow yourself the time to get the business in the right shape. Because when it comes to it, you'll not be able to and will not be prepared for every question that gets asked, but you should be at least 80% prepared. Because if you're not, the purchaser will either drive a horse and cart through your evaluation, or they'll just walk away.
Well, thanks, Ken, for being here today. Really, really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for watching. And look forward to more content. Stick around, folks, for more stuff coming. Join the M&A Concierge platform. We've got more great content coming for you. And Ken's going to be back to teach you more, to share more. And thank you, Ken, for being here.
No problem at all. Thank you, Mike.